I started my professional career about 20 years ago in London as a chartered mechanical engineer working in building services. So I kind of lived and breathed this stuff for quite a long while and can relate to some of the problems and issues that people have talked about today in terms of things not working, things not fitting, and a whole range of issues we've got up there about risks and uncertainty, complex supply chains increasingly. You know, we're not just bidding traditionally. We're having to put together complex supply chains where we're sharing information and resources, and it's open book and it's partnering. A whole range of issues that make this stuff more difficult. And let's not forget, you know, we're in business. We're about delivering assets for clients, whether it's delivering it to a main contractor or delivering it to an end user client that will operate a building for a number of years. We're not in business to do BIM or to do collaboration or to do the techie stuff. You know, we're about doing our day jobs of delivering assets for people that want an asset, a building. So I'm sure we can all relate to these issues. And what are some of the things that contractors want? When I meet these people around the world in different countries, you know, ultimately they want to figure out what to build. So as Paul's saying, we're on site, we've got something to deliver. What is it we build? Where do we build it? We need to optimize how to build it. So we talk about optioneering nowadays and buildability. Many of the time I've sat down with a contractor on site and they look at designers' drawings and just say, but why have they designed it like this? You know, this is not the most effective way to do it. It could be done better. Now IPD can help to solve some of those issues where the contractor and designer sit together and jointly develop a solution. But it's still a big thing for the industry. Need to know who needs what, when and in what format. And again, this is picking up some of the themes that Paul was talking about. You know, contractors are not about doing modelling or doing design necessarily. It's actually doing things like design review, construction reviews, buildability assessments, and so on. Understanding what got built. The big one is obviously as built. You know, what did get built? The last day of the contract. What do we give over to the operators, to the owners, to maintain the asset? And what sort of format's it in? And then automating IT. You know, we can't get away from it. IT is a very big part of what we do in the industry now. And I'll just make a quick advert for Comet that some of you may be involved in. It's a group that started in the UK, and it stands for Construction Opportunities for Mobile IT. And it's bringing together specialist suppliers, contractors, clients, users, and getting them to use some of this clever new technology, things like GPS, RFID tags. And the group's just started in Australia. So I'd encourage you to look at the website, to join up to that and participate in really developing systems and processes that help you as an organisation. Just want to touch on the BIM hype. There's an awful lot of hype around in the industry. You know, you can't open a magazine or journal or sometimes even the financial pages now without its BIM is splashed all over it. People saying, we use BIM, we save 10%, we did this, we did that, it's fantastic. But there's a well-recognised hype cycle that applies to things like mobile phones, internet shopping. Something new comes out like BIM, and there's a huge amount of expectation. Call it the peak of inflated expectation, where people come to a presentation like this, they see a great sexy video, what some people call Hollywood BIM. They think that's great. They go back and they spend thousands of dollars on a package of BIM, or millions of dollars in some cases. But they quickly realise it doesn't actually do them any good. It doesn't live up to the hype. You know, they install this thing on a big shiny machine in the corner, and it doesn't create their drawings automatically. They still get clashes on site. They can't set things out on site properly. So they've invested this time and effort. And in fact, some designers and contractors I talk to say they're spending many more times the amount of money to produce drawings or construction documentation using 3D tools, using BIM, than they were using 2D. So it's a big issue. Now, as we all know, BIM does give us benefits. You know, it does do some great things, but you have to work at it. So gradually people understand what it can do, and you reach a point when it's actually giving you some benefit. Now, it could be that you're just doing 3D clash detection, it could be setting out on site, it could be cost estimating, any number of things that work for you as a business. But it's important to understand it's what it does for you individually, not just this great big panacea of BIM. So the trick is to try and go from the somewhere halfway up on the left-hand side before you get to the peak and kind of head off to the plateau. So what do we usually do as an industry? Well, we use 2D. Okay, we've used 2D paper for years. Increasingly, we're using electronic paper, so we'll issue PDFs, but essentially we're just doing 2D. So we start off with the designer. The designer hands a whole pack of paper across to the contractor, and the contractor then sits on site, makes sense of this box of paper, or tries to build the building. And at the end of construction, passes across a room full of paper, boxes, plan chests, brochures, everything else, all goes off to the poor FM guy, who on day one of the contract opens up boxes and finds he's got the contractor's holiday brochures and memos and all sorts of things stuck in a box that's marked handover information. And we know it doesn't work. Again, without going into detail, we all know the issues about that, about passing information around the supply chain, where it doesn't work. And this figure, it's another waste figure, pick a number really. This was in The Economist magazine a couple of years ago, where they looked at global projects. And they said typically 30% of the project cost is waste. Now, some of that is rework, but a lot of it is in things like variations. It's in the fact that things go missing. There are errors in drawings, in site works, all sorts of things, but this all gets hidden in contingencies and extras and revised programs. But there's a lot of money in there that shouldn't be in there. And there was a report from the organisation called NIST in the United States a couple of years ago. It's quite a thick document. It's worth a read, but it's got some highlight figures in there. And it said that 40% of design time is just spent locating and validating information. So forget whether it's 2D or 3D. I spent my time on site. You've got two drawings, exactly the same number, the same revision, but they show slightly different things. In one the man holds here, and one someone's moved it over there. And you spend time trying to work out which of those two is correct. Or maybe neither's correct. Maybe there's a third version floating around somewhere. The second key point was about entering information once and reusing it. So this is starting to get onto the BIM theme, where people will create something and it's then reused for lots of different purposes. So you have this pump that sits in the BIM MEPOS system in your model. If that can be used by the cost planners, by the programmers, by the purchasers, it all starts to save money because you're reusing that information. And poor communication between systems, again, wastes a lot of money. So that's starting to get into things like BIM interoperability. Can I take a Revit file and put it into a Bentley application? Can I take a Bentley application and put it into an ArchiCAD file, and so on? And I put this in just to show, really, to sort of sum up where we are. Now, it's interesting, when I show this to owners, I always used to think naively the owners would see themselves at the top. But the owners always say they sit about the middle somewhere, and the main contractor sits at the top. You talk to the main contractor, they say, no, they're on the bottom perch somewhere because they get screwed by the architect. There's all sorts of things, we can all relate to where we sit on that chain. So BIM's a better way of doing it. Again, thinking about our own version of BIM, what relates to us. I've put the definition in. This is the simplest definition of BIM that I've found. I like it just because it is simple. There's lots of academic work about BIM, but it's really about the process, as has been said before, of generating and managing asset data through the life cycle. Now, as an industry, we get very excited by the kind of what some people call Hollywood BIM. It's the moving images, it's that we sit down with clients and we show them, we walk through. It's all the clever, sexy stuff that looks good. It never really goes beyond that much. We're starting to go into construction, but we're not really integrated into construction yet. So this diagram up here really is trying to encapsulate that whole BIM process and emphasising it really is about delivering asset information for users. So we've got all these pipes and ducts and fans going into a model, but importantly it's about the data that sits behind them. So what can the client use long-term to get benefit? And what can we as contractors and designers get from that along the way? Paul was just talking about these different file formats as well. As a contractor, you're faced with receiving all these different bits of information. And a typical design team will be using Revit, ArchiCAD, Bentley Mechanical, a whole range of different tools, SketchUp. Next year there could be Google BIM or Google Mechanical BIM, or all these things are constantly coming onto the market. And it's important that project teams can use the best tool for the job. It's very rare you can find one client that will say, right, we only use one package and only one version of that package. It's very difficult to do that. The Bentley approach is what we call federated models. And it's a very efficient way of working when you've got larger teams. So each discipline creates their own stuff, if you like, their models, their drawings, their spreadsheets. And in this environment, the important thing is that only the originator can change their content. So if the architect here is creating his walls, when he puts his models into the shared environment, you can't have the structural guy moving an architectural wall. Okay, so ownership has to retain with the originator. And it means you can bring those together, as Paul was just saying, for things like clash detection. We never clash a whole building in one go. In my mechanical services background, we'd do things by floor or by zone, or you'd clash a plant room or a riser. So what you want to do is be able to bring that different content together in different times, in different formats, for different purposes, but do it in a way that's managed. So going back to ensuring if I'm bringing those different parts of the building together, I know that I've got the latest version. I've got the version that's correct for doing coordination. So it's very efficient. Again, just a few models. We all do our own thing. We've got the structures, the mechanical, electrical, piping, hydraulics, all doing our different version of a design submission for that particular project. And we bring those together at different points for different purposes. And I think someone mentioned lonely BIM earlier, where you've got these pockets of expertise all doing their own thing. So in this case, the different disciplines are all focused on delivering their construction documentation for the project. And that's what we call little BIM. So it's giving benefit to individual practices, whether they're designers, contractors, or other people in the chain. But it's really about that individual task. But buildings exist in the real world. So they sit on a site. That site's got a topography. There are underground services. There are roads. There's rail, water courses. There's mapping. There's geospatial information. So although we talk about BIM, really all these other disciplines have got their own version of a model. So there's geospatial, there's power, water, bridge, and a whole host of others that all contribute to this virtual environment. And in Europe now, they're beginning to talk about asset lifecycle information modelling. Because when you talk about BIM to a road designer, they just think, it doesn't apply to me. I'm doing roads, I'm doing a different version. So it's not the building. But really building refers to the process of modelling. So it's more about the asset. So why do owners like big BIM? This is a diagram from Building Smart from a couple of years ago. And if you look at the typical life of a project, you procure it, you design and build it, you operate it for a number of years, and then you dispose of it. So this was a typical design and build project using good maintenance. When you look at the BIM approach, so that darker curve, clients are starting to get really interested. And designers and contractors too, because this red area here is looking at the savings that we can now get. So some people today have talked about savings of 2%, 5%, 10%. When we get to the end of construction, we've got this red area of saving that we can all sit back and say, well, that's great. Look, we've done things more efficiently. We've all got a bit more money in the pot at the end of the project. Clients like that 50-year life cycle because clients know that if they get good handover information, good quality asset data that they can maintain that building with, they get a much lower cost over the life of the building. Now, it gets even more interesting when you look at what Building Smart said was a typical design and build project. So the green line, where you maybe skimp a bit on design because you want to cut your costs. That then comes back to bite you during construction because things don't work, you get more clashes. And then you don't do proper maintenance. So your life cycle costs great in the first few years. It's like buying a new car. If you don't maintain it, you think this is great, it's 5 years old, it's almost new. Years 6, 7, 8, you start to get more problems and it becomes much less cost effective. Another thing recently I've been picking up on with owner-operators is they say, yep, that's great, that's why we want BIM, but what about my legacy data? So I've got all this great stuff that's given to me as models or databases. What do I do in 5 years' time when the project team's left? The contractor's gone, this particular software package is now on, it's 2 versions later, I can't read my old files. How do I manage that whole legacy issue? Okay, so that's another big factor that clients are starting to ask. So let's look at how we can start to address some of that with things like collaboration and coordination of information. I break it down, I suppose, broadly between pre-construction and construction. So on the left-hand side, pre-construction in design, we're dealing with lots of technical content. So we've got models, drawings, spreadsheets, a whole host of technical content. Again, this stuff that makes up the design solution. And on the right-hand side, we've got the distribution of of paper, essentially, of documents, of construction documents that are used for managing the installation. Now, there's a big overlap, and getting on to, I suppose, why I'm talking this afternoon, looking at ProjectWise. Now, in the session we've got now, there isn't time to go into a presentation and show you some of the features and functions. Again, we can do that outside or afterwards. But it's important to understand that, I suppose, relationship between coordination and collaboration. So, coordination at the start is all about ensuring those 3D models that get created. To create your construction documentation, it's done in a controlled way. It ensures you only have one copy of something. You don't have multiple copies of the same thing floating around. And ProjectWise is a way of creating a managed environment. So if you want the cost planners to be entering some data into a particular model or a drawing, they take that from a central repository. That means it can't be overwritten. It's the correct version to use. It can't be overwritten by somebody else. And let's not forget, all this exists, again, in the context of a business. So your company will have its own business systems for finance, HR, all these different systems that make up your environment in the company. And they're all interlinked. So in our coordination system, like ProjectWise, you're storing your drawings, your models, your data, operation and maintenance data, perhaps geospatial information. You've got your commercial systems. On the right-hand side for the construction, we've got document control, project controls, all your tender information, trade package information, and so on. So our model comes out on the left-hand side. It's all controlled within ProjectWise and managed in a federated way. So you don't have to have one big model. You can create lots of individual content that's linked together. And ProjectWise will track the versions, the history. You know, if you want to know who's opened the file, who last used it, what did they do, even when it was deleted, you can see that. And then during construction, if the project team wants to issue an RFI, for example, that takes a particular drawing or model, again, we don't copy something across from one system to the other. That source content stays on the left-hand side within ProjectWise. And something like Primavera Contract Manager will just suck in and take out a link to that source file. And that's really important because this whole design iteration process goes on during construction as well. So if there's a change on site, you don't want the site agent, the site guy, to just take out a drawing and draw something in by hand. You want the structural engineer to move that wall or that column and do it in a managed, controlled way because they're the person that should be doing that. But all these things are linked together. So how does Bentley support these project teams? Well, everything starts with the models, with the drawings, with the content that's created in a coordinated way. Bentley has a number of applications broken down by suite, so building, civil, geo, and so on. But importantly, Bentley's approach is to put a lot of effort into interoperability. Now, we're way off having that goal, that ultimate goal of having one single transferable file type. Now, that's some way off yet. But we do ensure that if you've got, for example, a Revit model, or you can share that design data with someone working in the Bentley environment. Or you might want to take geospatial information and some mapping information. FabMap, for example, from TSI. If you want to take one of your Bentley models and put that into manufacture, again, you can take that across. Our version of Navisworks is Bentley Navigator. So whatever you can do in Navis, you can do in Navigator as well. And from that, you've got things like interference management, clash detection, and schedule simulation, 4D. Now again, 4D is interesting to me coming from a construction background because I'd have design teams coming in saying, we're going to give you a model and you can do all this great 4D stuff. But in reality, the planners didn't want it. The planners are used to using their Gantt charts. They've got their own packages they like using. They don't want the 4D model. They might do it to demonstrate to a client how the building goes up, the logistics, but they don't use it for day-to-day work. And other people are talking about 5D, 6D, 7D, sustainability, life cycle, all these different things. But importantly, all this stuff, again, it's about reusing all this information, all comes from having that good quality design content. So once you've got that model, that data set up, it's correct, it's consistent and complete, all this other stuff then can flow from that. And the final part of the jigsaw is then ProjectWise. So what ProjectWise does is manage all that technical content, wherever it's coming from, in a controlled way. So if you're doing a clash detection review or a design review, it's not a case of sending off a drawing or a model to an FTP site. You go into ProjectWise, you assemble that content you want, you make your red line marks, your comments, That's then stored back in as an overlay file that notifies the person concerned they have to fix something. And because it's integrated as one managed workflow, it means you can track those changes, you can ensure things are corrected when they need to be. So looking at ProjectWise for contractors specifically, so if you're working in the mechanical contracting world, your designers are creating all your great stuff. When it comes to site, you've got this blizzard of information, all these deliverables coming at you. It's Revit, it's AutoCAD, it's Bentley, it's Tekla, it's SketchUp, it's everything. It's files, 2D, 3D. And the guys on site, as Paul was saying, it comes back to, well, okay, what do I build? You know, I just want to tell me what to build. Yes, maybe it's in 3D, maybe it's in 2D, but I need whatever's appropriate for me. On the bottom right, you know, just to emphasize the fact, some people want models, but that's very rare in the industry. You want contractors who want models. Most people want a PDF, or they want a paper print, because that's what we've used for years. That works for us. You know, we know that works. We're not saying it's the most efficient way of working, but people need to still have that in some cases. And again, ProjectWise will manage that and ensure it's delivered in the right way, the right content at the right time. Just talk a bit about best practice. I've put the iPad up there just to remind me that ProjectWise is coming out for the iPad in a couple of weeks' time. So people that are used to using it in an office environment, it's interesting sitting around this sort of auditorium, the number of people that have iPads for checking emails and making notes. It's just another way of opening up the content to a wider audience, making it easier to access the information. And again, a bit like BIM, there's a huge amount of academic theory that gets published about collaboration. You know, what it is, how it works, a lot of technical stuff that comes out of universities. But essentially, it's very simple. It's on the left-hand side, it's about creating stuff. It's design content, drawings, models, documents that needs to be delivered on the right-hand side in the right format, the right time, with the right content to certain people for certain tasks, whether that's clash detection, design review, costing, and so on. And we need to preserve some of that at the bottom for legal reasons or for operation and maintenance, superseded information, a whole range of stuff you need to keep. And within that environment, you need quality assurance and quality control to ensure it's in the right format to be delivered. And also rules for reuse. So you might publish a model at a certain point. It may be suitable for costing, it may be suitable for coordination, for clash, any number of different reasons. So those rules can be built in. So really, that is collaboration. It's not difficult stuff. And there's a British standard that came out a couple of years ago. And I sat on the industry panel that actually put this together before the British standards people got hold of it. And we just looked at best practice. So we said we know some projects work really well in sharing information, working in a federated way, and let's capture some of that. So we looked at over 70 projects in Europe, and we just wrote down what worked and what didn't, and we developed some best practice from that. So I'd certainly encourage you to look at that document, and there's some guidance notes with it. Where it has been used, again, this is an important one for me, you know, 10% construction cost savings. Now, the standard doesn't give you, it's not a CAD standard, it doesn't give you a prescriptive way of working, but it sets up a framework. So it says when you name your files, for example, this is the standard that you should use to ensure it's done consistently across the project. This is how you set up your collaboration framework on your IT systems to ensure when you're publishing something for someone to share, this is how you set up your workflows. And it gives a lot of flexibility how you actually do the technical detail, but it just gives you a framework to say consistently, this is what we have to do. And again, the big ones for me, again, things like supply chain profitability. Everybody gains, designers, suppliers, because it helps to take out waste and risk. And the beauty of adopting a standard is that it is just that, it's a standard. It's a best practice standard that's being used on some major projects around the world, and you can just take it off the shelf and apply it to a project. So it's like any standard. The more people that begin to use it, the better it becomes for the industry. Okay, so what do we need to do to go on this road to BIM? The first thing to say is it is okay to fail sometimes. You know, not all this stuff works when you try it on every project. And if you look at what we traditionally do in construction, you know, whether it's a new CAD system, a new tool, whatever it might be, we think about it, we plan it, we try it, and then we'll try it for a long while to make sure it's okay. Then we try something else. And it's sort of slow and steady. But really with things like BIM and working smarter, any sort of new technology, if you can just try a few things, try something small, try a pilot project. Don't go, for example, with the Trimble setting out system. Don't think, right, I've never used it before, but I'm going to suddenly set out this massive campus, this city-scale development, and try and do it in a week. You start with a building or a floor. You try it with a few people that have been trained in it. So it's a step process, but recognizing that sometimes this stuff won't work. You'll get some knockbacks. But providing your whole business isn't dependent on that process, you make much faster progress. The other thing to say is that it's okay to be average. Because again, part of the hype is that we sit in sessions like this, and there's the vision of BIM, the 5-year vision where it's all connected and integrated and it's all fantastic. But the developers I work with, again, have a number of suppliers, designers, contractors, subcontractors, suppliers, who are all doing different degrees of BIM. So we've got 0 to 80% on the left-hand side. Again, however you measure that, it's just an indication to say, yep, we're doing a bit of BIM, or yeah, we're doing loads of BIM. All our stuff is in 3D with data. So as a client, you have a supply chain like this. So what the smarter clients are doing is saying to their suppliers, look, just aim for average. And by doing that, of course, everybody wins. It lifts up everybody. That then means that a few people that were above average before are now slipped below. But it's constantly moving. So developers and clients are beginning to understand, look, it's not about going from doing some fairly okay 2D to doing full BIM. It's got to be that process. Okay, so again, a few pointers as to how to do this, touching on some of the points that Paul was making earlier. The road to BIM. I call it the road less travelled, to borrow a phrase, because whenever I show this to people, everyone sits there and nods and says, yeah, that's exactly what we do, that's how we do it. And yet when I go back and talk to them, very few people actually do this. But it's not difficult stuff. So firstly, develop your BIM strategy, which again sounds fairly obvious, but you all need to understand or ask yourselves, why are we doing this? Now, what is it for you? Are you a main contractor, a second-tier contractor, third? Are you a designer, a supplier? You've all got different reasons for doing BIM in your companies. And it's important to understand what that is and develop your strategy around that. Don't just go headlong into BIM and buying stuff because you think we should be doing it. Always bring it back to why are we doing it? What's the business case? Once you've got that business case, you can get the finance for it. And again, the key thing is to start developing some KPIs. Because the board will start asking, okay, yeah, we might invest $100,000 in product X or system Y, but what's the payback? When will I get my payback? What's the return on investment? So doing BIM is no different from any other business investment. Then come the pilot projects. And again, it's really important to start small and to build up. This is still fairly new stuff in terms of doing it well. So you need to have a few people that are well trained. You need to understand exactly why you're doing it. You need the right project in the right format. And you also need to develop things like documentation. Again, Paul was saying from a construction perspective, you need a methodology. What works for you? What's your way of doing BIM? Now, your methodology may be different from somebody else's. A bit like having a CAD standard. There are lots of CAD standards. It's important that has one that works for you. Prepare the deployment strategy. Again, before you start going headlong into putting all this stuff on site or in the office and using it, actually think about how you're going to deploy it. Who's going to start using it? What projects? Making sure your IT system is configured correctly. Okay, so all those things, again, like any IT deployment, any process change, think about what you're doing and how you're doing it. Education, training and support can't really be overemphasized. Now, as an industry, we focus very much on the training side of it. So, we get, as Bentley, we get people come through our training courses 2 days, 3 days, 4 days on a particular package. But sometimes you find somebody comes along and you say, why are you doing this particular course? And they'll say, oh, because I was told to come along at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning and do whatever the course is. Very rarely do people actually educate their supply chains or their individuals about why they're doing something. Because again, everybody will sit there and say, well, why should I do BIM? What's in it for me as a CAD operator, as a design manager, as a BIM manager? Why should I do it? And then the training, but then the support. So that ongoing mentoring and support on a project. So don't just cut people adrift. You've told them why they're doing it. You've told them what sort of behaviour they need to exhibit once they've done the training. But you then need to hold their hand in those first few projects to help them get along. And in fact, just thinking about BIM managers and picking up on a point that Paul made, very often a project won't need a BIM manager. You know, much of what we do in BIM is about existing processes and doing them a bit smarter, a bit quicker with some different applications. But really, things like design review, clash detection, they're all things that we do as an industry already. It's done by a design manager, a project manager, CAD people, individuals. So we don't have to go out and suddenly appoint a BIM manager or go and recruit somebody or promote somebody. This stuff is really done by existing people on existing companies. Just finishing off now really with 3 implementation principles. So when you're doing BIM, the first one that particularly senior people at C-level and GMs, they'll go through a process of understanding and being educated, but they always bring it back to, well, what about the technology? Because for them that has a cost. You know, they're used to signing off on new machines, new software, training and so on. But it works. It works on the laptops that people are carrying around today. There are versions that work on iPads and smartphones, and it's a common thing. It works on the equipment that we have. The second most important aspect is processes. So the processes and standards to make it work. Your project deployment strategy, your BIM strategy, however that looks. And there are different levels. There are global best practice standards. I mentioned the British standard. There are American standards for creating content, for modelling. You'll have your own company standards. So the Lend-Lease way of doing it, or the Triple M way of doing it, was your project delivery guide. And then there are particular project standards. You'll collectively agree at the start of a project, right, this is the project standard, the project way of doing something. The most important part, again, is the people, because that's what it comes down to ultimately. It's the individuals in your firms, your projects, that are having to do this stuff and make it work. And everybody sits there and says, well, what's in it for me? I'm a CAD guy, I'm a modeler, why should I do this? The GMs are also asking, why should we do it? Why should we invest thousands of dollars in this, whatever this is? What's the benefit for us? And then there's the how do I do it? And I put this in just to try and emphasise the fact it's called a picnic. BIM is a picnic. And it stands for, I actually came across it when I phoned up our internal IT help desk once. I heard them say in the background, another picnic. And I said, okay, what does that mean? And they actually said it stands for problem in chair, not in computer. So basically it's user error. And that's what BIM comes down to every time. It's not about the technology. There's whole different bunches of technology you can wrap around this stuff to make it work. But it comes down to the people every time. So the road to big BIM. I'm not going to stand here and say it's easy. It is difficult to do. You've got to think about it. You have to plan it. It takes time and effort to make this stuff successful. It's not a case of just buying the software. But there is a big benefit. If you're actually the ones that decide how you want to do it for your businesses, what you want to get out of it as individuals, it puts you in a very strong position. It puts you in a position of control. And it's important to create a solution for BIM and collaboration that suits you and the projects that you're working on. There's not one size fits all. It's not a case of just buying something and deploying it and that's it. Look at what the project needs, look at what the companies need and the individuals in those companies to get benefit from it. And develop your own individual road to BIM. And avoid doing too much with too little too soon. Thank you.